Shiko së nderuar, mirë mbrëma. Emisioni i sonte realizohet në studio dhe kemi arsyeën e veçantë pse e bëjmë këtë, sepse në studion tonë kemi edhe përfaqësuesin e emisionit të Fondit Monetar Ndërkombëtar këtu në Kosovë, zotri Sulemane, i cili do ta zbulojmë tani një informant i cili tani është në përfundim të misionit të tij dhe dëshmë ta shfrytëzojmë prezencën e tij në vendin tonë që të bëjmë një rrumbullakim të vlerësimeve të punës, të misionit, të këndvështrimet e tyre për atë se ka po ecë zhvillimi ekonomik i Kosovës, cilat janë sfidat, çka duhet bëjmë sipas vlerësimit të tyre për të arritur stabilitetin e zhvillimit ekonomik e kështu me radhë. Pra janë këto çështje të cilat janë edhe në përditshmërinë e punës së misionit dhe dëshira jonë është që të dëgjojmë, të mësojmë se çka, cilat janë vlerësimet. Mirë mbrëma. Dhe fillimisht jeni në përfundim të mandatit. Dhe si do ta vlerësoni të bashkëpunimin që kanë pas institucionet e Kosovës me misionin e Fondit Monetar Ndërkombëtar në Kosovë?
Well, first, good evening and welcome. Thank you for inviting me for this interview. Now, on the subject that you are asking, I think the history of the relationship between the International Monetary Fund and Kosovo needs to go quite a long way. Although Kosovo became a member of the IMF in 2009, really the office that I'm running has been in the place since 2002, even before Kosovo was member of the IMF. So that it was seen since the beginning that the relationship between the two institutions, the authorities and also the IMF, even before Kosovo was a member, has been established. Now, since then, of course, there was a process of two standby arrangements that have been approved and one staff monetary program that happened in between. So far, the relationship has been quite good. And I think both institutions value this collaboration in terms of policy discussions and also helping the domestic institution to grow in the process of development.
Po, proceset zhvillimore sigurisht janë ngushtë të lidhura me stabilitetin makrofinanciar, makrofiskal të ekonomisë që të mund të ecë përpara, që të bën plane zhvillimore. Sa kanë qenë të përkushtuara sipas vlerësimit tuaj institucionet e Kosovës që të ruhet ky stabilitet?
Okay. First, we have to understand that Kosovo is a quite recent country, very new, so it's still in the process of developing its own institutions and also building the domestic capacity to do analytical work for defining priority. Now, as part of the democratic process, there is a government that comes in place, and in that process, during the mandate of that government, there are a set of priorities that are defined by that government, and the government tries to apply a plan in order to establish it. Now, on the side of the IMF, so because of the profile of the institution that focus mostly on fiscal issues, it means budget issues, revenues and expenditure, and also on issues related with the banking system, financial sector. So these are the focus of attention of an institution like the fund. So you will notice that the collaboration between the fund and the authorities has been with quite a lot of concentration on the budget side. This also for one reason, because Kosovo decided to use the euro as a means of payment. So because of that, then fiscal policy becomes a very important issue. That's why there is a lot of issues that we have to work out to look careful about revenue based on the macroeconomic framework, and also is important to look at the expenditures. So it's in that context that practically we try to use two major indicators to follow how the different expenditures and according to the priorities that the government define, how these two indicators fall. One indicator is the so-called fiscal deficit, which is the difference between the revenues and expenditure. And the other one is what is called the government balance at the end of the year. This is linked with the case of Kosovo being a country that uses euro, so the government needs to have a little bit of what I could say a cushion that would protect not only the fiscal side for an emergency, and also would be important for the financial sector. It is in that sense that the macro financial aspects are taken into account when IMF and the authorities discuss all different policies.
Mendoni se s'kan qenë aq të disiplinuara, po kanë qenë të disiplinuar institucionet në respektimin e këtyre lojrave, rregullave të politikës makrofiskale?
Yeah, for that it's easy to look at the results of the budget execution every year. You will notice that in the case of Kosovo, the fiscal deficit is relatively low, say around 2%, which follows what is something that was approved as an amendment on the law on public finance management and accountability, something called the fiscal rule. Last year, the Parliament approved the fiscal rule that puts a guideline of how fiscal policies should be run in Kosovo. One should be fiscal deficit should be around 2% of GDP, and also government balance should be around 4.5% of GDP, and this puts some framework over the long term. If the economy continues to grow at the rates that are now growing, what will happen with this fiscal rule in 20 years, it would not reach even the limit that the debt law put, because that law says that the debt over GDP should be 40%. So if the economy grows at the level that is growing now, and the fiscal deficit is around 2% of GDP, if you look at a 20-year period, it will reach, say, 30-35% and will not reach the 40%. So that is one of the issues that shows that current policy so far has been in accordance to the fiscal rule.
Disa herë institucionet e Kosovës kanë pas, mos të themi, debat të nxehtë me Fondin Monetar për politikat zhvillimore, ose nga të bëhet investimi, janë bërë investime në infrastrukturë, edhe pse ka pas mendime po aq që të investohet në hapjen e vendeve të reja të punës. Si e vlerësoni këtë orientim që të investohet në infrastrukturë?
Okay, I think I should answer your question using two ways, let me see, that are complementary. The first thing is this issue about priorities. Now, it's not the role of the IMF to define priorities for the country. Okay? That is the responsibility of the government because they are elected to do certain activities. Now, what is important in our discussion because of the fiscal aspects is how those priorities that the government decides will fit into the fiscal framework. Because that is important in order to apply the fiscal rule. So whatever priority the government decides, we don't say much about that, but what we discuss is how those expenditures that have been decided fit into the fiscal framework and creates fiscal stability and growth also. So that is, I think, one aspect that I would like to stress first. The second that is complementary is that yes, of course, you are in a country, if you look at statistics that you have a very high level of unemployment. And in particular, unemployment for youth, for young population, is very high. Now, it is clear then that any strategy that any government should take into account that aspect, because that is also for social stability. One thing is to have macro fiscal stability, but also is important to have social stability, and one of them is creating employment in the society. So I guess that is another issue that any government that comes has to design policies that should create employment as much as possible. Now, I would have to add another thing here. If you look at the structure of companies in Kosovo, most of the companies are small and medium-sized companies. And very small percentage in terms of number is bigger companies, are high, so relatively big companies. So it is important that policies should be taken in such a way that should support the development of small and medium-sized companies, which will favor the employment in the economy. And that would create the process of development and create more demand, and people would improve their incomes with more employment. I guess one would have to look at these two aspects. But I have to stress again that in terms of priority, is the role of government to define priority, not the IMF. What we'll look is how it fits into the fiscal framework.
Po kjo a mund të ndikon në dinamikën e zhvillimit ekonomik nëse aq shumë jetë investohen në infrastrukturë më pak në hapjen e vendeve të reja të punës. Pikërisht, mbasi përmendet që kemi një shkallë të lartë të papunësisë.
Now, as again, I think I go on stressing this issue of who defines priority. So I think it's a debate that should not be the IMF to decide on that. That should be an internal discussion that should happen in this society. Now, I know that the society decided that democracy is the best way to run itself. So based on that, you have an election process. You decide who will be running the process for, say, the next 4 years. But I also can understand that a good government would listen to different stakeholders on different issues. So I guess what is important is the society needs to have more discussions about economic issues that has impact to make the economy to develop very quickly. That is still a process that needs to happen. Now, if I have to be concrete, you have to have the role, not only the government institution that should work together for that goal. You should have the role of the parliament to oversight the government. You should have the civil society to participate in the discussions of different issues in the right moment, because it's important to have debate in the right moment that is linked with the budget cycle, otherwise it does not have any effect. Academics need to have more analytical work that should support the design of policy. So there is all this set of things that should happen in the society as part of the democratic process that will help the design of better policy that should improve the employment and creation of jobs in the society, which is needed.
Dy elemente do shta mirësh me dhanë një sqarim. Si e vlerësoni çmimin që është paguar për 1 kilometër të autostradës? A ka qenë çmim objektiv nëse kemi parasysh çmimet në vendet e rajonit, në Maqedoni, në Bullgari, në Serbi, Kroaci apo në Bosnjë, dhe synimet për ngritje të pagave, të rrogave.
Okay, let's start with the price of infrastructure. I also need to stress one aspect here is that the IMF does not do assessment of projects. An institution that would have a better profile for that is linked with that would be the World Bank, for instance. If you need, say, more details about costs of projects and unit cost for this infrastructure or any other type of project, I think the World Bank would be the best institution that could give an advice for that. Now, what I can say on this is that, again, different institutions or stakeholders in society should be doing a little bit more of analytical work. And of course, then the parliament should have a little role on that, that should present this and discuss with the government. I think the only thing I can say from the standpoint of the institution I represent is that different institutions should make a little bit of analytical work, have concrete data, what exists from different studies and from different budgets in different countries, and make a regional comparison of costs. And then, I guess, is the role of the parliament and discuss that with the government to create kind of next step of being more disciplined in doing things. That would be my suggestion. Now, on the salary issue, if you are referring to what is happening at this moment, first you have to go to the budget 2014 that was approved in December. Now, if you look at that, there was a measure there, a proposal of an increase of salary in the budget. But at the end, what happened since April is that the government decided to have some other percentage in terms of adjustment of the salary. I think what is important again is to look at the budget from the point of view of an institution like the fund, is to look at the budget, how you make possible to have the fiscal and macro stability, and also to be able to apply the fiscal rule. Now, for that, there are a set of techniques that should happen. First, you have to see that the salary is in current expenditure. Now, the first thing that you have to do, if you increase too much current expenditure in relation to what was initially planned, you have to adjust another item in current expenditure. That would be first step. So it would be adjustment, say, in goods and service and transfer, things like that, still on the current. Now, if that is not possible, then the second phase is to make adjustment in the capital expenditure. Now, if that is also not possible, it means there is a need to make adjustment in the revenue side, so it means tax system. So this is the mechanics that an institution like mine, and of course any government or Minister of Finance, should be always doing this type of research whenever there is a decision like that. So the implication is that because any decision has a cost, and wherever there is a cost, you have to remember, in the case of salary, will not be for 1 year, would be for following year. So it's important always not to have 1 year assessment, but to have multi-year assessment in order to see what other measures, compensatory measures, should be taken in order to apply a decision that is made. So what I'm trying to say is that all policy decisions in economy has a cost. And having a cost, one has to think not only 1 year, but has to think more than 1 year and see how it fits into the budget and make appropriate adjustment in different items.
Dy çështje mbetën të hapura për zhvillim. Vonesa e ndërtimit të gjeneratorit të ri të energjisë elektrike dhe privatizimi I Post Telekomit.
That is again, if we start with one of the questions you made in the beginning, is this issue of the priorities. So there should be some way that the government should decide what is priority. Now, again, this is an area that as IMF we don't go into that detail. Of course, again, if you look in terms of strategy for a country like Kosovo at this level of development, energy is an issue. You go anywhere, here in the capital, you go to any place, other place outside the capital, you will notice that there are problems of energy. So if you have to develop some manufacturing or other type of services in the economy, you will need to have the electricity. So that is an issue that should be high in the agenda of any government in terms of this. But as an institution, we don't go into that detail. The same thing about the telecommunications. So the government decides to privatize. Well, there is a process that should be developed to privatize. We also do not interfere into this type of issue because it's not an area that the fund should concern. But what is important again is, whatever happens, what is important is good management of the public services and also the public companies. I think that is a critical issue that should be taken into account all the time.
Sigurisht një çmim I mirë do të ishte I mirëseardhur.
Yeah, I guess, okay, there are two aspects that you have to look at here. One thing is the decision to privatize because maybe there is a need to improve management or improve the services that the company can offer. This is one issue. If it is through privatization or through better management of public company, well, this is an issue that the government and the parliament of the country should decide. The other thing is, once you decide to privatize, then of course there is a price. So if there is a price, that is a resource that will come into the budget. Now, the problem is how you use resources of privatization when you put it into the budget. Now, again, you have to go to fiscal rule. The fiscal rule will say that if the government obtains resources from privatization, it has to be used for capital expenditure, not for current expenditure. So that is what the fiscal rule says. So you have already some rules that put some discipline how you use the resources from a process of privatization. But the problem is the decision of privatization is something that depends on the government and the process that the government decides to follow.
Dhe në fund një pyetje mjaft aktuale, borxhi publik I qeverisë. Prej 9.1% të GDP-s që ka qenë në fund të vitit, tani në fund të muajit të 6 kemi 9.8% të GDP-s borxhi publik. A është një rrezikim I stabilitetit financiar?
So this is an interesting subject. I noticed that lately in the media there is a lot of discussion about this subject. I think things have to be put into context. Now, first you have to start with something that is called the debt law. The debt law in Kosovo says that maximum debt over GDP should be 40%. That is one part. The second thing is any loan that this country gets has to be also approved in the parliament. Puts quite a lot of some restriction in terms of putting some discipline on that. So that is, I think, the framework that one has to look. And then recently, since 2012, the government started the treasury bill market. 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and lately 2 months. Well, that is part of also developing some internal financial market. Now, you have to understand that in this case, you start from zero and suddenly you are increased. But the base that you start is low. Of course, sounds immediate that was a big jump, but you have to understand that the base where it starts is relatively low. It's still 9.8%, which if you have to compare to many countries in Europe at this moment, this is quite amazing. So it's still under control. Now, you have also to look at that the Treasury issues Treasury bills associated with the budget cycle. So again, budget cycle the budget should follow the fiscal rule. So there is a limit on how much also the government can increase on that. So at this moment, I think the legislation and the fiscal rule is such that the debt can be put under control. But my message on this is always the problem of where you put the money. If that money is used for good expenditure on projects that will create employment, the money is used for projects that really creates capacity for this country to develop, I think that is the price of development sometimes. You have to use debt for that. But as long as it is within the parameters that are, I know that when you look at the current statistics, sounds that there is a big jump, but you have to understand that it starts also from a low base.
Ja, pra, shikos nderuar, ishin këto vetëm disa nga aspektet e këndvështrimeve të misionit nëpërmjet zotëri Sulemanit për zhvillimet në fushën e ekonomisë në vend. Ne falenderojmë për pjesëmarrjen e mision dhe për këto informacione, për këto vlerësime që u dhanë me këtë rast dhe vetëm mbetet ta përmbyllim këtë edicion të sonte të emisionit Standardi. Faleminderit për pjesëmarrje.